Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 220th of Kouryer Podcast. Our today's guest is Mr. Kevin Brunt. He's a digital artist with 10 plus years of experience in games production, working in a variety of roles as world artist and also environment artist. And we're going to talk about it in the podcast as well. We're having this call from New Westminster, Canada. And of course, before we get into the signature questions of the podcast, let me just quickly mention that in the for contact section of the captions, you can find the links to his art station, Twitter, and YouTube channel, and also his Instagram ID is at the caption as well. And if you're seeing this in Instagram, you can probably just tap on the post and see the profile that's been tagged there. So yeah, pretty much pretty self-explanatory. And with that being said, let's jump into the first question, which is kind of like the signature question of the podcast, which is, give us a little introduction on how you got into the world of visual arts and design. Basically, tell us your origin story of, what's led you to decide to become an artist,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my story is kind of weird, I guess. I grew up in a small rural town in like northern Canada, or like British Columbia, I should say, where like this isn't really kind of a career path there. It's mostly forestry and trades industry, right? And so like growing up there, fortunately, like I got to play outdoors and things like that. But like in terms of tech and like computers, like there was just like that's just really not a thing that my parents were even remotely kind of, purchasing or bringing into the house. And so like, I don't think I think my first, I guess, introduction to like video games, I was probably, I want to say maybe 3 or 4. My uncle was like playing an NES or something like that. And my sister eventually convinced my parents to purchase an NES, and we got like Mario 3. So that was like the first game that I kind of played. And it was like, I guess I got kind of obsessed with it. And to the point where I actually knew at a very early age that I wanted to do video game stuff. I just didn't know, how does one get to that? Like, what do I do? Right. And so like, I was always kind of creative, and I was always drawing, and I got a lot of like, I guess, inspirations from family members, because I had a family member that was a painter. And then I had a neighbor that was always drawing. So I would always kind of get inspired by that, and I'd be drawing and stuff like that. And I was really influenced by a Canadian artist named Robert Bateman, who paints like animals of all things. So not even remotely kind of what I do. But yeah, so eventually, I got into drawing video game characters, because my parents wouldn't really buy me any modern consoles or anything like that. I just didn't have a resource to that unless I went to a friend's. So I started buying like Tips for Tricks and Nintendo Power. And I always be drawing the video game characters and things like that, and imagining like what the games must be like to play, because I just didn't have the consoles like the N64s or anything like that for a very long time. But eventually I went on this like field trip to a ski hill, and Pokemon had just come out. And there was like this kid, and he was in the ski lodge, and he's just playing Pokemon Red. And I was like, what is this? I've never heard of this. And so I like sat down next to him, and I literally sat in the entire ski resort for like 7 to 8 hours that day. I didn't go skiing at all. I just watched this kid playing Pokemon Red, and I was just like obsessed with it. So like when I went home, I just started just drawing Pokemon, and like that's all I cared about was Pokemon. And because I couldn't play the games, I started designing board games. And so I started building like how could I prototype this, and just figuring that out. And I didn't even know why I was doing it. I just kept doing that, and I kept building these games and getting my young cousins to like play test it. And I was like training and figuring out, like, hey, this doesn't work. Like, how does this make good gameplay, I guess. And I was like actually naturally doing this and not having any background. Like I didn't have internet or anything like that till I was like 17, I want to say. But yeah, so then I started like, playing more video games with friends. I'd go over the place because they all have like new consoles and stuff. And eventually I got to dabble in level editors. And so I was playing around with like StarCraft level editor and Age of Empires, and I think eventually like the Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 editor. So that kind of gave me this like first taste of like what it's like to place things in 3D space. But I didn't really like think of it still as a career, right? And I think eventually, I was about maybe 16. There was a 3D course at our school. And so I got to try 3D for the first time. And of course, the instructor didn't know anything. We're just like, here's the software, figure it out, right? Here's a book. And so there was like 6 of us. And so that I started making like, I want to say like mechs, like armored cores, and building fantasy characters, because that's what kind of I was into. I was really into like Final Fantasy VII and those kind of games that, be having a lot of inspiration or influence from that. But like the thing is, like I just didn't know like you could do it, right? I remember seeing like the Halo documentary, and for the first time seeing all these like artists and designers and engineers building video games, and I was like, holy crap, like you can do this, right? Because it just growing up in this town, like everyone thinks that only thing you can do is trades industry, right? Because it's all like rural blue collar, right? And trying to convince my parents, I'm like, yeah, I want to become an artist. And they were like, that's stupid, right? And I had a twin brother, so you always get compared, right? He's a machinist. My dad's a machinist. All my family members are tradespeople. And so you doing the art is seen as like a weird thing, right? And so I kind of felt pretty depressed, I'd say, for like a good few years where I just didn't think this was even possible because I'd never been to a city growing up, like for like 20 years or whatever, 17, 18 years. And so eventually I went up north and worked in the oil fields for a while. And I remember working there and I was like, I hate this. This sucks. Like I don't want to do any of this. And you're in like minus 40 below weather every day. And it's just the worst. Right. And so eventually I remember I was like sitting in my bunk, whatever, on a camp in the middle of Northwest Territories or Yukon Territories, like, nowhere. And I was just drawing these fantasy characters and I was like, why did I not do this? I need to do this. And I remember there was like an art institute recruiter that had came to my high school, and they were trying to recruit people to build video games, and they were showing that. And I was like, that's what I should have done. Like I saw this, but I was so scared and like timid because I was like very introverted at the time, to try to do that and pursue it. So when I moved back like a year later, I said, to heck with this. And I moved back and I kind of started this, like, I don't want to say plan, but started focusing on art again. And eventually, like a year later, a friend, he's like, hey, I'm going to move to Vancouver, Canada. Do you want to come? And I was like, I'm doing nothing here. My life is stagnated and this is the worst thing to do as a small town. And I'm like, yeah, I'll get out of here. And so I moved to Vancouver, and within like 3 months I had enrolled in Art Institute of Vancouver. And so I started doing, I took the wrong program. I started doing game design because I thought like that's what you do. You make games, right? I didn't know there's like career paths. And I did that for like a year and a half. And the program was called like Game Art and Design, but there was like no art. It was like just documentation and creative writing. And so like drastically not what I was trying to do. And, it was great in certain level. Like I learned a lot of like, I guess verbal skills and like talking things and like writing. Like I got decent at that, but it wasn't really helping me build skills towards actually making a portfolio. And eventually I took this level design class in the program, and that kind of, I started like just being obsessed with it. Like I was out all nighters, like 4 a.m. I'm there till, or like up for days working on these levels and stuff like that like no one's going to play. But it was like building this, like, I guess, either inspiration or this like it was filling this void of like, man, I should do this. Like, this is what I'm good at, like world building. Like, this is what I should do. And so eventually I made the big decision to switch programs, even though like none of the instructors wanted me to, or I guess administrators, like they very deterred me from doing that because I was almost graduated. And I think like now I'm like 8 classes shy of a bachelor's of game art and design, whatever that means. And so, yeah, I had a big conversation with some friends who were like, yeah, you could draw. Why didn't you do 3D? Everyone was confused that you weren't a 3D artist. So I switched, and I did that for about, I want to say another 2 years. So I was in school for like almost 3 years, or just over 3 years. And, just obsessed with it. Like that's all I wanted to do. Like I was working a full-time job and going to school and trying to make this work. And I was like volunteering on side projects. And I think I did like 11 video game side projects, whether they be like indie releases or student projects before I graduated. And then I just targeted my portfolio doing realistic art at the time. And I got hired before I graduated. I was working at EA on Battlefield 3, I believe, for motion capture, which is not even remotely the same thing, environment art. But then when I eventually did graduate, like 6 months later or 3 months later, I got hired immediately working on Resident Evil. And it was like just crazy because I in such a short time, 3 years, went from like, I've hardly used a computer. I didn't even know what folder structures were, to now I'm working professionally in the industry, right? It was like 2008. So it was crazy, like, just being able to have that focus, because I was a terrible student growing up. I was very distracted and just did not do homework. And so, like, all of a sudden now I had focus and I was like obsessed, and that's all I cared about. So it's pretty crazy, I guess, the journey of it, going from like, hey, I'm forced to do trades, not going to do that, to making art like 3-4 years later, something like that.
That's interesting. Do you have ADHD, by the way?
No, I don't. Maybe I think everybody has a little bit. I don't know, actually.
Spectrum, of course, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, actually. I've never been tested. My wife actually thinks she has it, but I don't. I don't know. It's like kind of a hard thing to really pinpoint. But yeah, I mean, maybe in the younger years, I probably had a case of it, and it was like, parents just didn't bother diagnosing. They're like, "Guys, just weird."
Yeah, basically, yeah. I mean, the reason I say that is because, when you mentioned, not being able to focus when you were a kid, and also just then suddenly being able to hyper-focus, because that's like one of the things with people with neurodivergent people as well, and especially if they have ADHD as well. But it's not like a black and white thing. It's like all everything is just basically a spectrum, like even ADHD. Like, it's just depends on where you are, And of course, your mood and your environment could kind of affect that spectrum as well. So it's not like, you're always here. Sometimes, if life becomes more stable, obviously your mental wiring in your brain gets more stable as well, But
you develop, right? So
yeah, but because I was kind of like the same, when I was a kid, like I barely did any homework or paid any attention. I mean, and honestly, I don't judge myself like the homeworks were crazy. Like, for example, we would study history, like, one chapter of history. Then our teacher would say, write 50 questions from this chapter and answer it in your notebooks as well. I didn't do it.
Yeah.
And we should do it for next day. And we had to write everything. Like, even for a college student, that's a lot,
Yeah. Yeah.
And the next day,
go ahead.
Yeah, I was saying that,
fire away.
Sorry,
fire away. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. But the thing is, they would then send us to principal's office, and they were like, Rumpton, this is the last time you're going to do it. And I was like, okay. And in my head, the only thing I would do, it was just a traumatic experience. In my head, the only thing I was thinking about was my computer at home. That Rumpton I swear, now that I think about it, I would, without knowing, I would disassociate it from that stressful yelling and situation, and I would just focus on my happy place, which was behind my computer, my video games, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And they would say, next day, new chapter. They would, teach new chapter. All right, now 60 questions, everyone. I wouldn't do it. Like, who would? Like, actually, a lot of kids would, but I didn't. And I'm not. Yeah, it's just school is weird.
There's for sure, I'd say, like, I mean, school doesn't mean anything, in my opinion. Like, when you're young, like, it's so misdirected at times. Like, at least in Canada here, at least the school I went to, it was very narrow-sighted, I'd say. And, this is how you're being trained to be a worker, right? But if you're like, for example, if you already know what you want to do, there's no, like, why are you wasting time with all this school education, right? There's no, like, they just don't put a path for you to, like, pull out of it and go do something. Like, if you already know that you want to be a carpenter, as an example, right? Like, it's like, well, no, hey, you got to learn all these, like, maths and everything that you might not even use, or sciences that won't even apply to your career, right? But you have to know it, apparently, right? And I don't know. I wish there's a better formula for, like, especially if, like, younger aspiring developers or whatever just knew what they wanted to do, they could just immediately go directly into that type of a program. But unfortunately, that's just not how the school system is, right? It's very broad, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I honestly, think about it. Sometimes if one day I want to have kids, I 100% have to homeschool them. Like, honestly, like, because I know a school is a waste of time. And, if I was a kid, I would love to be homeschooled, because, and actually it's kind of interesting because I recently been, reading a bunch of posts and, watching a bunch of YouTube videos, and from everyone who's been homeschooled when they were kids, they all say, compared to all their peers or classmates in college, they are much more socially stable and outgoing. They're much more healthier mentally. But if you go through that meat grinder of education system, you of course turn out pretty messed up in some senses sometimes. And there's a lot of good benefits with homeschooling, but there's also it has its own challenges, and some countries don't really give you full sovereignty over how how you're going to go about with the education of your children. But
Yeah.
yeah,
There's
especially
there's
if you're an artist.
there's no real like recipe, right? I think like even this applies just to even getting into becoming a video game developer, right? Like there's no recipe of like this is how you have to do it. And I think the problem with school is like it's so specific, right? But it doesn't mean like it's just like the education system is very just intro based, right? Whereas like, even when you get into like game art school as an example, they're not always as targeted as well, right? They can have a lot of filler of useless things that don't really matter to your actual development. If I look back on my education, I had I had so many wasted time classes that just had nothing to do with what I was actually trying to train myself for. But schools, especially privatized schools, they just charge you, here's like $1,100, $1,300 for that class, right? And you've got like, I don't know, 45 of them you're going to take over your course of being there. And like they're going to just put a lot of filler in there, like because it makes money, right? But they just kind of, oh yeah, you need to learn animation. I'm like, I'm doing environment art, yeah, but you need to have an understanding of it, right? So it doesn't really mean anything. It's just they just charge you for it just because they can make $1. And I don't know, I feel like now, like especially like if you're smart, I know this is kind of a bit of a segue here, but if you're smart and you can really do your research, you can just do what you want, right? There's so many educational like resources now. Like YouTube is so robust, right? And there's obviously other things like Udemy, Gumroads, and Flip Normals, and all these other websites that you can purchase tutorials and learn how to do things without having to go spend so much money on your education. So
Yeah, definitely. Especially right now with with digital crafts and with coding and anything visual related, art related, you can just do it obviously. Right now online it's been easier than ever right now to learn anything. But the thing is, a lot of companies, they still require you to have some sort of degree. I don't know, you have more experience than me, of course. You've been in the industry for like more than a decade. But like from what I've heard and seen, like a lot of people, even good artists, they sometimes get rejected because they don't have any degree, like a degree in university. Because especially if you're a foreigner, I don't know about domestic, people, maybe people who are native American in Canada, but I've heard from artists who are like, not are, immigrate to Canada or America or any other first world country, for that matter, that you need to have some sort of degree because it shows dedication. It shows you are familiar with the culture of that country. And it's kind of like stuff like that. I know it sounds a bit weird, but that's like one of the things that they require. Most companies, they look for and is value. They value it a lot. And I mean, I know it sucks because like sometimes people are forced, put a lot of money and time of their life for it. But I guess it is what it is.
Yeah, I think it depends, right? Many studios, just as example, hiring here in Canada, they need to have a way to prove that you're a talented worker, right? And so that, to get work visa, they might need some form of education or relevant experience that they can kind of use as leverage to get you work visa, right? But it depends. Like if you're talented and you're skilled, a lot of companies will just buck up and just pay it and not care, right? Like I don't know. I think like it greatly depends on which country you're coming from too, and whether or not your education is seen as like they recognize it, which is a whole other conversation, which is very frustrating. From I know many friends that have tried to move to the States or whatever. But yeah, I think it depends on the studio and it depends on the role, right? I think like for many people, if you have the skills and you can demonstrate it, and the company has leverage and they have the dollars to do it, they'll just do it. But it is very frustrating, especially in the education sector. And I know like some people having already had formal training, and then all of a sudden, they try to move to like say Canada or the States, and they got to like they got to go to some school and spend $45,000 to $100,000 because I think they charge like double for immigration, international students.
More than double.
It's like 3 times, isn't it? Yeah, it's something stupid like that, which is frustrating because like if you're good, like I don't know why we put this kind of gatekeeping way of preventing people from moving to other parts of the world, but I understand it's like a way to control and make sure that you're not taking jobs from your domestic workers. But I don't know. I think it's like if people are talented and they're skilled, you should just be able to hire them. Doesn't matter. Like, and that goes into, I guess, a thing with the pandemic kind of changing, how we do hiring, right? Because it became kind of a global bubble, I'd say now, where you can just hire anyone from anywhere because it's kind of, I guess, accepted company wide, or industry wide, I should say, that people can work remote now. So.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a whole extensive topic on its own, but I don't know. It's kind of weird because I'm also in the process of it as well. Because like I'm trying to apply for Canada again, for the third time. That's 2 times I got rejected. And one of my friends who is a professional concept artist right now, actually in Toronto, told me that you need to definitely apply for at least get an Ontario College diploma or something.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm trying to apply right now. I'm in the process. For some reason, I need to. But of course, at the same time, I'm also going through my own studies and just setting up my portfolio and going through with my own project as well. Because I know in the end, if you're good enough, you can even get freelance gigs. So
Yeah, I wonder if and I don't have much experience on this just because I've only ever worked in Canada or out of LA in Canada. But I wonder if if you have relevant experience, right? Say you've worked 3 years in the industry and wherever you are in Europe, and then you can use that possibly as this is a skilled worker, right? Like education. I don't know. For me, at least, education doesn't matter. It's what can you do at the end of the day, really, right? I don't know. I find if as an industry, us gatekeeping, oh, they've never been to a school. Yeah, but they've been doing this stuff for 15 years. Doesn't matter. Experience is experience. Skill is skill, right?
Yeah. I don't know. I wish it was as simple as that.
It is very frustrating that, like I said, that we have these gates to, I guess, protect jobs. I don't know. It's ways of other businesses just making money off of other people. That's how it is, I feel. So
yeah. Basically, yeah. Because a lot of times, even if the company accepts you, it's kind of interesting. The company accepts you, but the country rejects you.
Yeah.
You need to have a bachelor's degree for it's so frustrating, honestly, sometimes.
Yeah, and like I said, I haven't had to deal with it because I've been, I'm domestic here. Fortunately, I was born in Canada, and so it's. I imagine if I was to try to, I knew I was going to have to work in run into work visa issues if I was going to move to Los Angeles. This was something that happened years ago when I started working for Riot. They were going to have to go, pay the government and stuff like that and figure that out. Right. And fortunately, Riot has a really good system in place that's very easy for them to do. But I've never actually tried to go work anywhere else, right, overseas or anything like that. I'm sure I would probably run into situations like that. Possibly, but companies will just pay it, I guess, if you have relative experience and they value you, right?
Yeah, definitely. And that's a really frustrating topic. But for now, let me ask you something else. To be honest,
you don't want to get sad here.
Yeah. Well, in the introduction, I mentioned, you worked as an environment artist, world artist, but now I want to ask you is, what is your main branch of design? Specifically, you've been focusing on, this whole past couple of years, and also tell us about your experience from the start of it until now. By branch of design, I mean, are you mainly an environment artist, or how did that evolve, your career in terms of roles you've been into?
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of just do a bit of a career how did we get here? I guess I when I started in motion capture initially, that was just a short gig, right? They just needed people to do grunt labor, and that wasn't a really focus that I wanted to market myself as, right? Hey, look, I can clean up work, right? That's not even though it's hireable, it's not what I really wanted to focus on. And when I was trying to market myself as an environment artist, I think one thing that I was really smart about was that I didn't stretch myself. I guess yes, I didn't target everything. I really focused on, okay, I'm just going to do this one specific scene just to showcase quality, right? And that was kind of a good way to setting myself ahead of other competitive portfolios. And even when I got I got hired on stills, and everyone was making demo reels, and I had a demo reel, but like they were looking at my stills of props and things like that. And so, even though like I had quality work, like from showcasing a whole level and stuff like that, they really cared more that I did really nice asset work at that time. This is, of course, in 2011, and the things have kind of changed now, and the expectations of what people know has changed as well. Like when I first got in the industry and I was working on Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City, the DLC that no one played because Capcom was like, we're going to split this game in half and we're going to sell half of it DLC. And so, yeah, not great. Then I think it ended up being like 6 to 9 hours the game did the campaign instead of having it the 18 hours it should have been because of money. Anyways, but like I hardly knew anything in video game art. Like I had built projects in Unity and in Hammer, but I really didn't understand trim sheets and hybrid trim sheets or how to use less to do more. And so like I think one thing that really has changed a lot, especially now, was like there's a little bit more, not as much I would say like they'll learn on the job kind of thing, right? We try to hire people that know exactly what they're doing, and fortunately when I was working at Slant Six Games, which unfortunately is no longer with us, but rest in peace. But I got to learn how to work in video games while making video games, right? And so eventually I worked there for 6 months, and then the company couldn't keep me because money was becoming an issue, and they had to unfortunately let a few people go, or not renew their contract, I should say. And right away I got recommended to work at a studio just down the road from there called United Front Games. That we were working on Sleeping Dogs, which if you don't know the history of that project, it initially was called True Crimes, and then it got dropped. And then it got resurrected because I believe Eidos or Square Enix decided to pick it up and actually finish it, right? Because it wasn't that far. And I kind of came in there and it was fix this game. And so I got to learn a lot about sealing off the world, not leaving holes in geometry, watertight meshes, if that makes sense, and just fixing other people's work. Because they were rushing to try to final stuff and it just wasn't at a good state that they could ship. And I think when I came in, they had like something like, oh gosh, I don't know what it was. I think it was like 5,000 open world bugs, which was crazy. Like it, and if people like we were at like a quota, like fix 40 bugs a day, right? Which is like insane. But we would open up these meshes, like I call them beehives, right? Because it's a mesh you open up or a level you would open up, and there's just bugs everywhere. Right. And so you would just be fixing all these things, and it just everywhere you look, there's just holes or like texture stretching, everything like that. So anyways, I got to learn and train my eye to like, that doesn't look good. Right. And then eventually I think it was a short job there and I was out of work, and I was at the school, Art Institute at the time. It's called LaSalle now. And I was helping a friend with his portfolio and just teaching him stuff and how to do presentation. And I remember running into a past instructor there, and he's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm doing the indie thing because I just didn't have a job." And he's like, "Hey, you okay?" And then next thing I know, I got an email the next day, and he said, "Hey, do you want to come work at EA, not on a sports game?" And I was like, "Okay, yeah." And so I started working on Plants vs. Zombies Garden Warfare, and at that time, I had never done stylized art ever. I actually had no aspirations to do stylized art, and it was actually quite intimidating starting that role and having to figure out how to paint textures and do everything that way. And of course, we didn't have Painter at that time. It was Photoshop, and it was, grabbing images and color correcting things, burn, dodge, right? And do all that stuff to create detail. And, you'd have texture resources and stuff like that. And it became, hey, you have to learn how to hand paint everything. And so like, fortunately I had a coworker there who's a very talented texture artist, and he, I kind of picked his brain and learned a lot of things. But I kind of stayed as like a junior environment artist there for about a year or so. And then I was kind of promoted to an intermediate level. And, I was kind of responsible for so much, though. I was pretty much doing senior work as a junior artist where, thrown into the fire and, you have to have a lot of level ownership. I was like the modeling guy. So I was building full areas, and, I had a coworker that was texturing a lot of it, or we'd kind of piggyback off each other and try to do that. And so that I would say like I really cut my teeth in that role and learned a tremendous amount about game production. What's too many shaders assigned to a model, things like that. And I stayed on that project, I want to say, for I don't want to say 10 years because I had a stint on Star Wars after that. But I was part of the Garden Warfare franchise for like 9 years. And, in that role, when I got to the second one, I was doing more leadership roles where I was being a people manager at times. And that was because the lead just resigned. And so they needed somebody to do it. And so I had to step up and just naturally do these things to help, push the product further or the project further. And it was scary, right? I had no idea. Now I'm like managing 16 people at times, like, and other artists. And you go from having no one to manage to 16 people. It was like pretty intimidating. And I was just constantly running around back and forth from desks to the studio. And I'd say like, and I had step counters, and I was like doing more than like 10,000 plus steps a day just at a studio, which made no sense because it's a desk job. But yeah, and then eventually I worked on Star Wars for a short bit after that because they needed help. They had for Battlefront 2, they had a bunch of maps that were coming in hot, really behind schedule, and our studio got contracted with for Motive Montreal to help them out. And we took, I think we did like 5 or 6 maps for them. And so, which it was really cool for me to kind of jump into a different project, because now that I've been working on Plants vs. Zombies for so long, you get kind of stuck in a workflow and how things are done. And so it was really exciting to kind of work on another project within the same studio that was completely different. Like the art was different, the workflows were different, and getting to see that. And so it was kind of another way of opening my eyes, like, oh, we could do this things and that on our project. Right. And so after I finished that, I went back and we were doing pre-production for Battle for Neighborville, which was another Plants vs. Zombies game. Technically Garden Warfare 3. And, that was really cool because we got to, from the ground up, we said we're going to be PBR, we're going to do stylized textures. And we really just built an entire art repo or art library of shaders, like the Look Dev Pod and things like that, to really facilitate and have a cohesive art style. Because like, as much as, PBR is just a common thing now, like we used to not have it, right? And everyone would have to figure out how to paint like each other. And the problem with that is like, someone would paint metal and another artist would paint metal and they would look completely different, right? And the spec ranges and things like that would be all off and no one's art would look the same, right? So, but yeah, I was a bit more of a senior role, even though I wasn't promoted to it, which is a whole other conversation. So I was doing world building. So I was kind of owning maps, taking them to completion. So my responsibilities within that would be, full on assembly of the level, working with design, performance, everything, right? Bug fixes, world bug fixes, as long as they're not asset based. So, which was very different for me. Not being more focused on the artwork or the asset work, doing a lot more, full on ownership of maps and getting that done. And that was another skill set to build upon. But yeah, eventually, I was getting very frustrated at EA because one of the problems that happens in the industry is that your career, like whatever project you're on, if you're at a studio, sometimes dictates your career. And unfortunately, what can happen at really large corporations or studios, I should say, if you don't have a really strong manager, you get lost in the entire studio. Your promotions or your, I guess, livelihood, even like compensation, is dictated by somebody else, right? And unfortunately, I was in a spot where, I got tossed around to like 5 managers, and they all had like people are moving or leaving, going to different studios, and so you get your whole representation throughout the studio just gets buried, right? And so here I was, I'd been at the studio for like 10 years, and I was still an intermediate artist based on pay, but on the studio, like the project I worked on, I was one of the seniors, if not leads at times, depending on which project it was. And so like, it was very frustrating and I was getting very burnt out with it. And I kind of like started focusing on myself and just working on my own personal portfolio again, because at the time I didn't even have an online portfolio. This was maybe like 5-6 years ago. And I started Twitch streaming, and like it kind of I guess pushed me into making more art all the time and, getting something done, a portfolio piece every month or 2 months. Right. And I started building an online presence because of it. And at the time, like I had no portfolio. I didn't posted anything in like 10 plus years. And it was really eye-opening to me because I really started to realize, oh wow, I'm very valued at other places. And I was meeting all these other artists and they're just like, oh, you should come work here. And I had a friend that like wanted me to come work at Blizzard, and I had other people like want me to come work at this studio. And I was like, oh, I know, I guess, no visibility at that there was like, I could move on from EA, right? Because at that time it was kind of scary to leave, just to like, I'd been there for so long, to jump ship and go to another studio, right? And so, yeah, I started building this portfolio and getting a lot more online recognition. And then eventually, I think I did this like crazy marmoset presentation at EA and how to use it as a workflow to like 80 or so plus artists or whatever. And all of a sudden, like, there's like directors like, who's this person? How come I've never seen this artist, right? And this artist's work. And I was like, lifting up a rock and someone just found me and I was a bug right there. This was weird. And yeah, so now I had another manager and he was like trying to promote me into becoming a weapons artist on Apex and Apex Legends. And I was like really excited to possibly do that. But at the same time, I had this idea still of like, I should really move on because they've just mismanaged my career. And they were even saying like, weird thing is when a manager tells you like, we have severely mismanaged your career and underrepresented you within the studio, and you're being told that by your employer. And then you're like, well, okay, well, are we going to fix it? And they're like, oh, we can't fix it until the next quarter. So that's going to be for 4 months. And you're just like, well, why am I here? Right. So I kind of had a conversation with them and I said, yeah, I think I'd rather manage my own career than let the studio do it because they've mismanaged my career. And so like I decided to leave the studio and I went to a small indie studio called Offworld Industries. And I started a lead there. So I went from intermediate artist to lead, which, makes sense when you look at the experience. But when your title, right, isn't matching that, it can look really odd, right? And then I was there for about a year and I was managing an art team, about 8 artists, and basically building them from the ground up and building these juniors to become better artists and train their eye and stuff like that. And it was really rewarding experience. And I think eventually I had like 19 people I was managing there for a time or briefly. It was crazy. And also having to do art at the same time. So like all over the place, right? Like, you wear many hats when you're at small studios. But eventually what happened, I know this is a long-winded way to get to this point, but eventually what happened was, Riot Games reached out to me, I want to say like 6 to 7 months of working at that studio. And, they really loved what I was demonstrating in my portfolio, and they really loved my experience. And, they started, I had never any aspirations to work at Riot, right? I just didn't play Riot games even, right? And even though I did stylized art on the side, it wasn't something that I was always like, oh yeah, whatever. And I started, they reached out and they're like, hey, do you want to have an interview? And I was like, well, I guess I have to say yes because it's Riot Games. And I did that, and 8 interviews later, and next thing you know, I'm working on Valorant and as a senior artist, and trying to figure that out and work under that game's art constraints and go from there. And now, like, I mean, I've been at Riot Games now for almost 3 years or 2.5 years, and I've been worked on like 4 or 5 maps or whatever now, and it's been really rewarding. Just getting to see how they work and also get recognized from that studio. Like I don't want to say it's like a feather in the cap, but it really meant a lot to me, I'd say, and of just, how value, like they just value you there. Right. And it really changed my whole, I guess, outlook at certain places, that some places are just way better than other places, So yeah, it's been a good run. And now I guess, like, I've have ownership of the competitive maps that we release and collaborate with other leads and principal artists there. So it's been great.
Well, speaking of maps on Valorant, actually, there's a couple of things, I actually wanted to ask you about, those. So you worked on Fracture, Breeze, and Pearl, and any other maps?
Lotus, and then I've helped with many of the updates. I just haven't posted Lotus in my portfolio. That's like, I'm gonna do that next week, actually.
Yeah, actually, have you also dabbled in and just tried the game yourself as well?
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean, we play the heck out of Valorant. Like, our team's very passionate about it. The maps team, especially, there, like, we have like this thing every Wednesday. We do like a maps team playtest. So we'll do our stand up, and then next thing we do, we're playing the game for like an hour, right? And it gets pretty heated, and we love it. So I think it's important too, right? Like you want to make sure that like everyone's very passionate about the game, right? Like everyone plays the game. So we care so much about the competitive integrity of the game. We're constantly critiquing it with there. We're like, one thing I think that's really interesting with the Valorant Maps team is level design is included in it. And at some studios, they like to keep them very separate. And though, they're still a different discipline. Like we're all a team there collaborating the whole time, trying to make everything work for each other. And it's really exciting. I'd say like you just get so much visibility or interface time with the LD team. And we're just trying to make a better, more competitive game for our players. Right. And yeah, I think like it's been a very, I guess, eye-opening experience because I've worked on other projects and no one plays the game. They're too busy trying to make it. Right. And I think the thing is like when you work on such a, not just like popular product, but like it's just fun. And so we everyone's very passionate that they're working on something that's really cool, I'd say.
Yeah, that's awesome. And which one is your favorite map, by the way, to play in?
Oh man, that's such a tough question. I love Ascent to a certain degree because it's just so classic. But I really like Pearl. And I mean, to be honest, the map I really like the most right now is the one I'm working on right now. That's the one I care about. I can't talk about what that map is, but that's the one I've been really enjoying the most. And I think our whole team is very passionate about it.
Yeah, and by the way, are you aware of how the community is reacted to each map? And how
we're always very well. I try not to read the Reddit though, because
no, don't.
There's only so much hate I want to see. But you know what? I don't know. People are passionate, right? And I think like everyone's always going to say, this is the best map, or they're going to say this is the worst map, right? And I think even just talking about our previous release with Lotus, like I as the person that was like we have this weird term called map captain. It's the ownership of that map. I actually thought it was going to tank. I was so worried about it because it was so weird. Like we had 3 different sites, which we hadn't done one since Haven. And it was just it was weird. Like the plant sites were weird. And it was something that, props to Joe Lansford. He's always trying to push doing something different, right? He doesn't like to stick to the norm. And I think like we were really surprised by how well it resonated with the community. And you're always, any negative comment's always going to stand out though. Right. But we take it pretty serious. Like I think it's the best part about working on a live product game is we can always fix things. We can always make things better, right? And one thing that's really cool, at least of the release strategy that we did with that map, was that it wasn't in the competitive rotation yet, and so we get to find all the bugs that players find, and then we got to fix it for competitive play, right? So it's pretty exciting in that level because we can just make the game better all the time, even though it can get really fatiguing because you're always working on the same thing, right? It's always like the same game, but there is a benefit to live services in that regard.
All right. And I mean, personally for me, my favorite maps on Valorant is I honestly don't get the time to play anymore, but the maps I played that I enjoyed a lot were Bind and Split, especially Split. For some reason, I love Split. I don't know, that's my favorite
Split's
map.
Beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's like gameplay wise, I really also like it, but Lotus is actually good as well. They added there's new mechanics and dynamics in it as well. But my answer is gonna be cliche, but I mean personally, the map I don't really enjoy the most is Fracture. To be honest, I'm sorry.
Yeah, actually, that was a stressful map to release. We only did it. I think we did it in like 4 months. It was crazy, and
Wow.
I was pretty stressed out. We had a lot of, I would say, things happened to the maps team where a lot of people were moving on to different projects within the studio or leaving the studio for the environment maps team. And it was pretty tough because I had just started and I had just finished off Breeze. And the next thing was like this Fracture map. And the studio was really trying to get to this competitive, I think it was like 7 maps, competitive map pool for esports. And we were trying to get this done as fast as we possibly could. And it was a lot. Like the team's pretty small. I think we had like 5 or 6 artists on that map total. And one of the challenges making Valorant maps is it's very custom work. When you look at other games, they can really embrace the modular art workflow. And the problem we have with Valorant is, especially the way that it's level designed, it's so custom authored, and it's intentional, right? For call outs, especially, so people can landmark all the time. These are very tiny spaces, right? And you just need to know, which side players are on, so you can get a head click. But it was very difficult trying to build a map that was so weird, and it was very, very, I'd say, targeted to kingdom architecture. And if you had never done it before, it was a little weird. And so there was a lot of growing pains, I'd say, from the art team, because they were very new. And we're kind of on environment art team 2.0 in a way for Valorant, because like I said prior, many people have moved off the IP to just different things internally. And it was a lot to try to understand and learn to take in, because even though I've worked on other games, Valorant's very, very constrained in terms of its memory footprint. And I always kind of relate it to working on Xbox 360 titles, just in terms of how much memory we're allowed to do with texture memory. And Geo's not really a big issue, but there's challenges there. I guess one of the biggest benefits though for working on Valorant though is we don't have to build collisions. We're all per poly, right? We don't have to do any raycast meshes or things like that. Whereas at other studios I've worked at, it's making art is the only one part. The other part is all the technical stuff under the hood that you have to build so that your stuff is in performance, right? We don't use LODs, right? That's just something we don't care about. It's just all, it is what it is. That's what it is, so yeah.
And well, speaking of maps now, let's talk about characters. Who do you main on Valorant and why?
Well, I'm a Breach player. Breach and Sage. Oh, love Breach. Nice. Yeah, Breach is my favorite. I don't know. Everyone hates it because you're just getting blind all the time when they're playing against me. But yeah, he's kind of my favorite. He's just so fun to set up teammates, or you always feel like you can kind of do something with him, as long as you've got the abilities in your resource pool. But I love playing Breach. I know he's not the most favorite out of all the characters. He's definitely a niche role, I would say. But it's weird. I initially played Brimstone for a while, and I just wasn't good enough to be a duelist, right? So I kind of embraced more support roles. And then I was stuck on Sage for a long time, and that was kind of my whole thing, just helping people out. And now I'm a little bit more aggressive when I play Breach. So,
or now, actually, here's the thing: when actually Breach is not one of those agents that doesn't get picked a lot. So I mean, it's actually a good thing, because most people don't know how to play against it. If you actually know those agents well, you can actually really abuse those abilities and get a lot of easy wins.
I've actually had many funny interactions online when I pick Breach, and every now and then there'll be another player I'm in the same lobby and they wanted to pick Breach, and we're always it's that Spider-Man meme, hey, what?
Yeah.
Who are you? You do exist, right? So yeah, I've had a lot of fun interactions with other players. They're like, oh, no, you pick him, right? Oh, cool, right? So we've had really good, awesome. I think, messages back and forth many times. So, which always gets weird because, when they find out that I work at Riot or something like that, conversations change drastically. But
what is the next map? Where is it going to be? Who's the next agent?
Yeah. Can I get a gun buddy? Give me a gun buddy. I think I feel like 50% of my DMs are just gun buddy, gun buddy, gun buddy. So, which it's great that we do it, but it can be very frustrating reading my inbox all the time.
Yeah.
It's the same line. They copy paste. They basically copy paste. I don't know what happened. Some YouTuber did this is how you get a gun buddy, and now everyone follows his tutorial, and so it's the exact same paragraph, and they send the same email. Every Riot employee gets the same email. They just change the gamer tag. So it's been pretty funny that way.
Wow.
But I don't know. I like it. People are very passionate, so I think it's exciting. Any interactions I have had, I've had some weird ones before online where people are not so nice, but generally people are pretty excited that they're meeting a Riot employee or whatever. So,
all right, here's the thing: how does your design process usually go? Anytime you want to start working on a new project, basically.
Is that personal art or production, map?
Actually, both if it's possible. If you could
Yeah,
explain those.
that's a great question. I can start with personal art, which is like my favorite thing to do. Yeah, I usually like it's pretty straightforward in terms of like there's no real crazy science to it. It's I'll go from a block out just trying to figure out the idea. Um, depending if I have concept or I have a mood board of just different ideas that are in a pure F board. And I don't really set a time for myself for personal art where I'm going to go, hey, this is how much time I have to do this in. I don't like to put constraints on myself like that because I feel like, it's my time. It's like my time to enjoy stuff and really try to learn a new skill or understand something, right? As an example, like when I did the Trophies of War piece, that was initially just supposed to be a skull. That's all it was. It was just to learn organic modeling. And that quickly, skyrocketed or cascaded or scope creeped into becoming this like very large custom, everything is a unique prop. And, really focusing on storytelling and, because I didn't set it to do it in a time frame, which it like went over the course of like a year of me just working on this personal piece. I got to like really evolve it and analyze it and change the project, right? So I guess to answer your question, like I don't know, I just when it's my personal art, yeah, sure, I'll do sculpts and whatever, and then I'll go into like the whole production workflow, like create your LP, bake it, texture and substance painter. I think the biggest thing that I take a lot of time in is this presentation, and I will do oh gosh, I'll do so many cameras and figure out unique ways to like surprise the viewer, right? Or showcase them something that at least I think has value, right? And I usually try to, I'll do be like 50, 60 cameras and then I'll only cut it down to like 17 or 20. Like I do a lot of failure, I'd say. I make a lot of mistakes and, always try to look at how to improve it, right? And so that's kind of something I really spend, honestly, I'll spend like a month on a presentation. Like it's weird. I'll spend a lot of time. I don't just like here's a few screen grabs done. There'll be a lot of back and forth, and I'll put it down, and I'll come back with fresh eyes, and okay, do this. Like how could I make this resonate more, right? But with environment, very depends. I guess production, I should say, very depends where you're working, right? If I was to explain Valorant's workflow, we'll get gray box from LD. And in that phase, while that's been going on, the concept team will be doing what's called a blue sky. And so they'll go and try to figure out what this could be, right? One of the cool things I would say that the Valorant Maps team does that, you don't really get to do as much working at other studios is we pitch what the maps get to be generally. So we'll have like the entire environment art team pitch what they think the map could be instead of it being like heavily art directed. Where it's like a creative director or an art director pitching what the map is going to look like or what we're going to do. And then that'll go to the concept team and we'll have like a vote of what we want to do. And they'll do maybe some ideas and then we'll kind of narrow that down even further and choose what that's going to be. So it's really cool where, you get this from the bottom, it gets pitched to the top and the top and the directors pitch it back to us and then we pitch it back. It's actually a pretty cool process compared to like I've worked at other studios where it's just, this is what it is. This is what we're making. You have no say, right? And there is obviously like different leeway there. Like sometimes it's a little bit more dictated by directors, but generally it's usually the maps team gets to propose what we make. So anyways, we go from that blue sky theory to first pass block out once the concept's been established. All right. And that's usually a process of like month to 2 months. And we'll go and just block out, get rid of all the design block essentially and do base silhouette and everything like that, temp lighting. Right. And then we'll go on a production phase after that once we're ready to go, once blockout's done and there's no more design block. And we'll start building texture sets, right? And just slapping textures on everything and getting a first pass. And that's usually a course of several months. And then we go into what is polished. And that's where concept will do another pass again, where they're painting over, tons of our work and trying to figure out what can be better compositions and what can be better color sets. And one thing actually, just to go back quickly, I feel very fortunate in is that like, with Valorant and more importantly with Riot, like we really embrace concept art. And, we have a lot of concept artists just on one map. Like there's like 5 plus outsourcing. And that like compared to other studios where you might have just 2 concept artists on an environment team to support you, right? Whereas like at Riot, like we really invest in it, and it just helps us create better products, right? But yeah, we go from there to once polish is done, it's usually a course of like a month, 2 months, whatever, to finaling, which is performance. So I'll have to do a ton of optimization of textures, light maps, draw call instances, everything like that, where, no tech artist is doing it's coming from the environment art team, right? And then, while that's going on, we're fixing bugs as well to shipping. So that's kind of our process.
Now that in Unreal Engine there's like a technology called Lumen, do you still have to rely on light map UVs as well? Or
So we're using an older version of Unreal, and it's kind of, to a certain degree, it's kind of custom. Like we've stripped out a lot of things, and there's, like our base shaders, like 40 instructions or something like that. Like it's very simple. So we're not allowed all the bells and whistles. They actually kind of gatekeep it because of performance, right? And so we're not using Lumen or anything like that. Who knows in the future? Maybe. Who knows where it's going to go? I don't know. But yeah, in terms of like our production, we're not the up-to-date Unreal stuff. Like we don't get all the bells and whistles. That's how I always kind of relate it to working on Xbox 360. Like we barely get blends. We're just so primitive in our shaders and stuff like that. And it's all intentional, right? So that we just don't have crazy performance hits, and because we're really focused on frame rate, even though like our players will just go on they'll take their high settings and drop it to low. So anytime, right? It almost is a sad thing where we just don't really get to see the art at its fullest all the time. If you look on like, pro players and things like that, like they don't care. Right.
No,
so even though there's,
yeah,
go ahead.
Especially the pro players, they always decrease the graphics as low as possible so they can have better performance.
Yeah. Get rid of that vegetation, get rid of all the decals, get rid of, mesh decals, whatever, like everything like that. It's kind of sad to a certain degree, and it hurts our hearts a little bit as the artists that build those maps. But I mean, Valorant's art style is so simplistic, right? Like we have a lot of constraints and rules even on that, where we're trying to make sure we don't have anything within the 6 foot higher area that can draw too much attention to itself, and really paying attention to value so that things don't contrast that much and characters can become hard to discern when you're trying to like move your cursor around and get a shoot a player or whatever. But it's there's a lot of challenges that we go through that just in the entire environment art creation process.
Yeah. So from what I'm understanding, that you guys are working on Valorant with like a modified version of Unreal Engine, right?
Yeah.
Right. Awesome. And is there any possibility that you're going to upgrade to like a newer versions of Unreal in the future?
I can't really comment on that. Possibly. Sure. I don't know. It's just, who knows where things are going to go with it. It depends. Like always the question you ask yourself, like when you're going to do an engine upgrade, it's like, what do we get out of it? Right. And like Valorant is so simplistic in how it's crafted. It doesn't really have any crazy, techniques that it's really using. I would say it's very old school video game creation process, I would say. And would nanite really benefit the project? I'm not sure, right? It's not really we're already so limited on our constraints already that it's, you have to ask yourself, what's the value that we get from it? And there are things for sure, but I think the team is probably going to take a very, very serious look at, is it worth it in the long run? From a talent pool, it would make sense. Many people are going to be learning Unreal Engine 5. And obviously like Epic, being the big marketer that it is, it's going to definitely push everybody in terms of like who we hire to learn it, right? They're going to think, oh yeah, I got to use Unreal 5 because it's the best, right? And at least that's what they're told. And so everyone will really push on that. And so when we're trying to hire somebody, it makes sense from that standpoint that someday we would be in it to bring someone on that knows the software so we don't have to train them, right? So we'll see where things go though. I can't really dive too much into that though.
All right, no worries.
All good.
and all right, actually the next thing I want to talk about, I think we briefly kind of talked about bits and pieces about it, but it's actually an interesting topic that we also talked about it before we started recording, that this whole notion that when you finally push through and get into the industry.
Mhm.
Now there's another big challenge that you have to also maintain your position and also develop your skills at the same time.
Mhm.
So sometimes it could be really sometimes conflicting. You know what I mean? So what are some of your insights and experiences in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough. Like when you're trying to navigate, your career path and just get in the industry, you're kind of focused on specific things that will, employable skills as I call them, right? But when you're in the industry, it becomes this. You get to these weird crossroads where, you know, what project you work on will dictate what you learn, right? And it can be very frustrating for some artists where they're so like even working on creative IPs where they can be very limited at times on what they're doing, right? And maybe they want to branch off and do hard surface, but they're working on a studio where they're sculpting rocks, right? And it can be very difficult to find the place or the situation sometimes to really start being able to learn on the job. And a lot of times like you'll have to on your own time outside of work hours train yourself. And I think one thing, this can be I'd say a bit of a misconception sometimes for many artists when they try to, when they get into the industry. Now they're like, well, I'm here now, right? I don't need to keep working on my craft, right? But in many cases, like a lot of artists, there's like what is it, like a 5-year shelf life sometimes where, they stop developing their skills. And, some game productions can be 5 years and you come out of it and, you still you have to retrain yourself because the industry's moved on, right? We're using new tools and new things like that. And if you're not on a project that's constantly using up-to-date technologies, you can get left behind, right? And so like that's why I think it's like incredibly important to do personal art. And I know a lot of artists like, once they get in, they don't want to do any personal art. It happens. People have families, things like that. Things get in the way, right? And it can be really difficult to create the discipline to keep focusing on your craft and your work and getting better at your job, right? And also having the foresight to recognize like, oh shoot, I need to improve. I need to focus on myself and get better, because that can actually be pretty tough for some people to recognize within themselves, where they're like, well, I mean, I'm not learning these things. I'm not getting better here. I need to make a change, and whether that be moving to a different studio or just learning some tutorials and practicing other skills on the side, right? So I went through, like I said prior on an earlier topic we had, I went through a big phase on that where I had to like look at myself in the mirror and be like, I can be way better than this, right? And just to invest in myself, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I honestly haven't experienced that myself yet because I'm just a junior. I haven't even get into the industry, so I have to face that challenge. But yeah, I can.
Yeah, there's like a lot that you're like trying to learn and take in right now. But what I mean by that too, like, I mean, we were having this discussion earlier about environment art, and it's like it's so broad, right? And it's one of the challenges that like if you look at character art, you can be so specific, you're very contained, right? Tech art can be all over the place, right? But in environment art, it's like, you got there's material authoring, there's lighting, there's sculpting, there's like organic side of it, hard surface side of it, there's learning architecture, there's understanding color theory within it, right? And how to make things kind of harmonize, right? Like there's so many layers within that craft that we just wrap it up in a pretty bow, call it environment art, and everyone just assumes you can do everything, right? When the reality is there's so many specializations within that field, right? So it's a tough thing to recognize as well in yourself, like which is the right path for you to go, right? Because you could go and say focus on becoming a hard surface artist and get really good at that, but all of a sudden the studio is like, hey, we need you to do just materials and substance designer, and next thing you know, you're like, I've never done that before. And I think like that's the biggest thing, is learning to become adaptable is probably the most important skill set that you can learn in environment art, and being able to pivot, right? Because the fact of the matter is like you're never always working on the same thing. Projects change, the task is different all the time. And I didn't even talk about technical skills within that, right? And that's a whole other thing, right? So
yeah, definitely. Like, I mean, I myself have like my background was with Blender, and I learned Substance Painter later. But now that I started this course, of course I learned a little bit of Unreal. I'm working with it now.
Yep.
The big three softwares I have to like really good good at, and I'm not, and I'm just at the beginning, is Substance Designer, which is the most
Yeah.
daunting one. Painter is pretty good, like, I mean, relatively to other softwares,
Pretty
but then,
straightforward.
but Maya, oh my god, like, I mean, compared to like the modeling compared to Blender is much more, harder for me to grasp. I mean, but it's industry standard. I have to get used to it. Like, there's no way I can get around it.
Yeah, I think like with just to talk about tools, like I think I mean, I'm gonna say this a lot, it always depends. A lot of times, like, if people are hiring and they see that like you have an understanding of how to do stuff, software doesn't necessarily become that much of an issue, right? Like if you're a skilled worker and you learn, say, 3ds Max as an example, but the studio uses Maya or Blender, right? They know that you can pick it up, right? And it's going to take, obviously, I mean, dare I say, a couple months to really understand that software and really know how to run with it. But like if you're like, one thing that you can't, like, the thing is, like, you can't really train people's eye, right? Or teach them what looks good. That has to come from them with the hours that they invest. Like, software is one thing, right? But like creating a good artist is way harder, right? And like tools are just tools, right? Like for me, like, I don't know, in our art team, like, we don't care, right? Like, how you do things. Does it look good? Yeah. Okay, cool. Right. Like, it's like, how'd you texture it? Oh, I textured it in Photoshop. Oh, you didn't use Substance Painter, right? No, it's like, that's fine. Looks good, right? It's, obviously, if you're on a specific pipeline though, where it's very, very tailored to like, this is how we work, right? Where these are our custom exporters, these are all those things. Then it's like a different thing of like, how do you unify a workflow for an entire team so that you're not bottlenecking that pipeline, right? But that's a whole other different thing though. It depends where you work.
Yeah, then there's a sculpting, there's ZBrush, there's Marvelous Designer, there's Speed3. Like, the list just keeps going on, as an intriguing
and
artist.
what? And the thing is too, like, the longer you work in the industry or the more years you put into it, like, software comes and goes, right? Like, I was having a conversation recently about XNormal and how it had such a massive impact 10 plus years ago on the industry, and yet no one talks about XNormal. People still use it, but it's just, there's so many other tools now that have taken that space, right, and jumped in there, right? So it's just a thing that, like, software has a shelf life, and making the commitment to one is like important, but just recognize that it's not going to be the thing you always use, right? Like, you'll see a lot of ZBrush cowboys, as the term's called, where that's all they use and they're very good at it, right? But if you're at a studio, it doesn't have they just don't use ZBrush. They're like, wait, we need you to model this in whatever. Now you have to kind of learn something else, right? And so that's why I keep saying, like, just being adaptable and recognizing a tool is a tool, and not being I would say an elitist, or what is not an elitist, but like like, what's the word I'm looking for? Where you're only focused on just one tool and that's all you want to use, right? Like, where you're a cheerleader of one, not a cheerleader of one tool, but like
fangirl.
I guess a fanboy. Like, I guess. I mean, I find it's fine to be a fan of things, but I guess, I don't know. I think, like, just using, being focused on one tool, like, and just like, that's all I'm going to use. I'm never going to learn anything else. This is the only way I want to work. Like, that the industry changes so fast that you can't be that way, right?
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, that was an interesting topic. Now, I want to ask you about something else, actually, which is, who are some of your favorite artists and designers that have inspired you the most?
Oh man. That's a tough answer, because I really get inspiration from, like, everybody. Like, I see aspiring artists that are just like, no, this is like, they've only been doing this stuff for 2 years. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like, I love that idea, right? I think, like, looking back in the day, like, I was very when I was in school, more importantly, I really liked Heldar Pinto's work. And this is back when Polycount was being, I guess, the be all end all for game art or CG Society. And so he was doing some really cool stuff. What's his name? There was a website called philipk.net. That was where I learned a lot of environment art skills off of tutorials from this one artist. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Philip, I think it's a very Russian descent, I believe. Anyhow. And so I really loved his work. And then obviously Michael Vicente, Orbs, like him. I remember when I was in school and he created the brush or the Orbs brush pack, and I was just like, holy wow, this is insane. This solves so many problems for me. This is how you make art that looks good. And yeah, I think like I was really like just seeing his breakdowns really helping me understand and dissect his work. But now, like, I mean, we have so many artists now. It's so hard to just like, oh, this is my person's favorite work. Like, I don't know. I just love environment art or game art, I should say, more importantly. And I get inspiration from like character artists, environment artists, tech artists, shader artists. Like, I just love it all, and it's kind of something I'm obsessed with. So, trying to pinpoint one inspiration is really difficult now because there's just so many good artists.
Yeah, definitely. And also, there's another thing I need to mention, and also ask you as well, which is I think going to be like a juicy question as well, which is any advice and tips for a good portfolio and artist for a 3D environment artist? Like, what are some of your basic golden rules that everyone should always, basically, recruiters look for? Basically, you know.
Yeah, I think like, I mean, I teach as well, and I get to talk to a lot of aspiring 3D artists. And I think one of the main things I see is just making sure that your portfolio has a direction, right? I often see a lot of times when I'm doing portfolio reviews where they're kind of all over the place, right? And I know like saying that and coming from looking at my portfolio where I have like weapon art and environment art and like vehicles, and it's kind of confusing because you're like, well, like, where are you going with this? But I've also been in the industry for a very long time. So it really doesn't matter what I do because I have a lot of experience in my that I can just draw upon. And I always find it fun to make stuff I don't get to make because it's the most exciting thing for me. Anyways, but making sure that you're targeting your portfolio. And what I mean by that is like, if you want to work at a specific studio, maybe just focusing on that studio's look it's tough. Like if you say you want to work at like Blizzard, right? And so the only way you're going to work at Blizzard is you're just going to do Blizzard style art, right? And that is a very good way to put yourself on the radar for that studio because they see your work and they go, this fits our game. This looks like our work, right? And that gives you like a lot of check boxes for them to go, yes, well, this person works, right? We can hire them because their stuff works for us. And I think the biggest thing when you're creating your portfolio is you want to make sure that your portfolio answers questions, right? Because you see this all the time where environment art's got, or environment person says they're environment artists and they've got weapon art all over time, and like it's very confusing, right? You're like, well, what are you like? How are you marketing yourself? Are you trying to work on a content team, or do you want to, or you want to work as an environment artist? And so showcasing employable skills is for that role that you're trying to get hired for is more important than just, hey, look at all my pretty stuff that has no relevance to that job, right? So I think like I see this a lot where artists just don't have a direction, right? Like if you were trying to market yourself as an environment artist, show environment art, show environments, show modular assets and reuse, like show how to use trim sheets and textures and doing more with less, right? But you'll see this so often where someone says they're an environment artist and it's like they just do props. You're like, no, you're not building worlds, right? You're just showing prop art. And unfortunately, one of the things that's happened in this industry is a lot of prop work gets outsourced, right? And it depends on the studio, right? We still do assets internally as well, but we also have huge content teams that we work with, right? And so, just making sure that you're targeting the right studio that sets your portfolio up for success, and that can be of many things, right? Like if you want to say work on realistic games, showing realistic environments, right? Like you don't have to be so specific where like, hey, I just want to work on Call of Duty, right? You can go a little bit more wider with that. And, Ubisoft studio might look at that and like, oh, this fits us, right? Like, so you don't always have to be so specific. Even though being very specific to a studio's look will help ensure that you're going to be more successful getting hired there. Right. But it depends. Like it's such a broad question because, or broad answer even too, because every studio is different and they all look for different things. And that's one of the hardest part about trying to get a job is, what one studio is looking for, another one's completely different, right? And the role, like your environment role at that studio is completely different at that other studio, right? There's no cohesive way that a role is defined at times. So, yeah. But I say like the main thing though, as well on that, just to kind of keep iterating on that, is making sure you have strong quality work ahead of everything. And I know it's cliche to say, but really training your eye to focus on what looks good and make those so many mistakes along the way to get to that point where like this is quality work. Like quality work will get you hired no matter what. If you have a weak portfolio where things are kind of like all over the map and it's not really, it's mediocre work, unfortunately. That's the best way I can say it. Like you're just going to get passed on. There's someone that's better, right? And so like really focusing and working on your skills and getting quality work, like that goes way more than having like, hey, this week I made this prop, this week I made that prop, and just like spending time in your portfolio. Like it's okay to spend 3 months to 6 months to a year on a project. If it's quality work, people will see it and they go, wow, this person has quality work, we'll hire them, right? Like they don't care about volume in your portfolio, right? So I see this a lot in portfolios where they're just like all over the map. Like, here's everything I've ever done, right? Not here's my quality pieces.
All right, yeah, I can see what you mean about that. And the next thing I want to ask you is like, all right, for now, all this time I've been, talking about art and, industry and all of that. But now I want to ask you something, kind of unrelated, which is what area beside the area you're working on right now, which is, of course, in the realms of art and design and creative fields, would you be interested to explore and learn in the future? Like basically what other non-art related hobbies or ambitions or things you have in life that you want to explore in the future?
Like outside of the industry, or is it more like
no, non-art related, not just about the industry,
non-art
just
related? Oh, that's yeah. I've been getting into like, I don't know. I've been doing a lot of weird stuff. I've been doing like getting into like kind of production stuff, like cameras and editing and things like that. That's been kind of something that's been really fun. I really want to make tutorials eventually for like game art tutorials, and I know that's like still art focused, but it's something that I feel like I have a lot of experience in. I want to kind of help provide that value to other people. I also do like a lot of mentoring and instructions as well. And so that even though it's still in the same realm, it's kind of a passion I have. So it's always tough because like everyone's like, oh, what are the other things you do? I'm like, oh man, I'm just so focused on video game stuff. Like it's so tough for me to like, want to do other things other than this, because it's like as much as it's my job, it's my passion and my hobby, and everything I care about is like video games related. Some friends and I have been doing this kind of fun little thing, like which we might release eventually, where it's like it's weirdly enough because I'm on a podcast here, but it's kind of an art podcast actually. Not art, actually, just video game stuff in general. And so we've been kind of playing around with that and seeing how that goes and seeing where that will possibly lead to. But that's been kind of a thing that's been taking up a lot of my time. So yeah, it's been kind of fun just being very humble and learning a new skill set that has nothing to do with video games to a certain degree, right? It's like, when you're trying to learn cameras or audio or whatever, like it has nothing to do with, making video game stuff, even though like at work, like I've had to do presentations before and it really helps. You're building a different skill set that doesn't help me make environment art, but it helps show off environment art. So yeah.
Yeah. And well, we've reached the final section and question of the podcast, which is called Time Capsule. And of course, I assume you can guess what it's about, by the name of it, like Time Capsule, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But let me paint a picture for you. Like, let me paint a scenario for you. Imagine you're in a capsule, like escape pod of a shuttle, and you're about to get ejected. You're basically locked in. You're about to get ejected to the space, and people are seeing you from the other side of the window, and there's a countdown timer for a couple of minutes. All right, so these are your last moments you have available, but there's kind of like this voice log recorder that you can say your last words on it. All right, that sounds grim and dark as well, but bear with me. Now, with that scenario in mind, what would you say in that moment? What stuff would you say from yourself as a human being to any other human being who might listen to that in the future?
Oh God, don't take yourself so seriously. I don't know. I don't know. I tend to, I think just because it's working in this industry, like I have a lot of like game dev PTSD. And so, from working over like the hard years, and sometimes it's like really hard to manage expectations and manage time. And, I sometimes will take this craft a little bit way too serious. And so I would say just like chill out. Everything's gonna be okay. Because I don't know. I think I've worked so many years in this industry. I've been very fortunate, and I think I have like a little problem sometimes where I think, oh, the last day, and like today might be my last working in this industry, right? It's because it's scary and everything's always, it can be stressful at times. And I think I would just tell myself like, just chill out, everything's gonna be fine. So yeah.
All right. They're short, but very powerful, honestly. Like,
I
just
guess, yeah.
chill out. Everything is going to be okay.
Everything's gonna be okay.
That's
As long as
awesome.
the world's not getting destroyed in that scenario, we're fine.
All right. Good. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming by. Thank you for your time. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, no problem.
And for anyone who's interested in 3D environment art, this is one of the juiciest like episodes you can listen to. So if you're listening, or you know a friend who's trying to be a junior, who's trying to be an 3D environment artist, like share this episode with them. And with that being said, again, thank you so much for coming by, and thank you to anyone who tuned in and listened to this episode as well. I hope you enjoyed it as well. As always, leave a comment down below if there's any suggestions, comments, or critiques. I always read them all, or you can just send a message to me on my Instagram page of Kouryer Podcast. You know where to find it. It's pretty easy. And with that being said, take care till next episode. Take care, everyone. Stay safe, and bye bye. Have a good day.
Cheers. Take care.